Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Bearded Baptists. We are Gene, John, and Darren. John, the babyface Baptist. So, but we thank everyone for joining us. And if you want more information on the show or what we're talking about, be sure to head over to sovereignjoy.org. This is right now sponsored by them. It's our only sponsor or support. So we have openings if you're interested, but go there and you can find information about what we're talking about here. Sovereign Joy is a nonprofit organization, so we are strictly supported by donations, but we have a lot of resources there. So please check that out. We'll have a link in the show notes. That's sovereignjoy.org. Guys, how are we doing this week?
Doing well.
Oh, I have to turn your mics on.
Did you mute us still?
I did, because you guys see...
Misbehaving behind the
Yeah, I
scenes.
know. What you don't know is they kept talking over my intro. So, we're trying to... We
thought it was better content.
well, yeah, because, I don't want to do a whole lot of editing of this, so we try to get this in one take. And so, I'm sitting here fiddling with buttons and volume knobs, and every time I go to start the show, someone has to hop in with a comment. So I'm just going to mute them. But
I thought that was the way we roll with this thing, right? This is supposed to be spontaneous.
Yeah. Well, I just never have your mics on. So all the shows,
it's probably the way it's been the whole time.
So the shows are just me talking.
You just see our mouths moving.
So, all right. So, gentlemen. Anything? What's going on? We got spring in the air again. Not to date the airing of our show, but it is kind of nice. We're recording this the day before daylight savings time.
Correct.
Which, I love because it's not dark at 5 o'clock anymore. Mm-hmm. It's not dark at 5 now, but at least we have a little bit more time, and it's just nice.
Are they good? I mean, they've been talking about, and maybe it is going into effect, that they're going to permanent.
I thought it was 2024. It's getting abolished, so we're not even going to touch the clocks anymore. I could be mistaken, but I thought there was a federal.
In which place is it going to be permanently daylight savings or permanently the other way?
I think it's when we push the clocks forward. We're just going to leave it alone.
Good.
Which is daylight savings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to permanently. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you've got, for a few years, I lived in Arizona in mountain time, and they don't do daylight savings.
Yeah.
Now, how
started because of farmers or something like that.
It's a Ben Franklin thing. Yeah.
Was there no farmers? I guess
there's just a desert in Arizona.
The cowboys were like, never mind this daylight savings mess. We don't need pish posh.
That's right. They didn't go and tell time.
So, yeah, but you have this one zone in America that doesn't comply, which is awesome. I love that already, the not complying thing. And that was great. When I lived there, there's no falling back. There was no springing forward. Your time was your time. Now it complicated things because then you had to calculate, okay, who's ahead now by how much, who's behind, what time of year am I in? And so with that, you had to kind of keep track of, but it was great. Now out there, of course, their whole weather in Arizona is much different than ours here on the East Coast in the Northeast, which is amazing. And I would love to kind of go back to that area again. But at least for us, we lose an hour's sleep, which some people aren't too happy about. I don't mind that for the sake of, having sun.
Yes.
Sunlight at 7. And then, of course, as it goes on, throughout the summer, looking outside at 9 o'clock and you still have a little bit of light in the sky. That's a wonderful thing. We always joke around here in my neighborhood that people come out of hibernation. I haven't seen my neighbor in 3 months because of the winter, right? And then spring comes and everybody comes out of hibernation. They're working in their yards and,
Yeah.
Gene has that too out in his homestead, right?
That's right.
That's true.
Yeah. If anyone, man.
So what else is going on? I mean, I took my son, dropped him off.
That's a big
yesterday.
step.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's had a job, kind of, but he was working remotely since COVID.
Gotcha.
And so he was at home. He graduated early from college, came home during COVID. And he just changed jobs, so we moved him.
Wow.
Got his first apartment all by himself now. Jen's having a tough time with it, but
and it's not just that; it's that he's a few hours away.
Yeah,
so it's not like he's still in the area, and
not super
and
close, but not super far either.
Yeah, but still enough to where he's away. He's like
Yeah.
officially away. It's not,
And it feels different than college because they're going away, but there's lots of people their age.
Correct.
They're going to make new
Yeah.
friends. There's a lot of activities that they're involved in. But now it's real life on your own.
Yeah.
Shopping for your own groceries, cooking your own food, doing all that stuff. you know?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
There's man stuff here.
That's right.
Yeah.
You got to do it at some point.
Well, this is true. And I think it's great because the manner in which it's happened as well, right? Like Jack is someone who's got a good head on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. It's not I'm getting out of here because I can't stand you guys and, I'm ready to spread my wings kind of thing.
Right.
Which is kind of what it was more for me in some ways. It was something where, he's a very responsible person, takes a good job and now is kind of, starting to establish himself as his own individual person and as a man. So, praise God and amen. And for that, that's what we're like really kind of, pushing for is because the pattern now is this failure to launch kind of thing where you see people, getting onto 30s, mid 30s, they're still with their parents. And it's one thing, if you're there to care for a parent, right?
Right.
But it's another thing if it's, you're in your 30s and it's, oh, hey mom, is my laundry done? That kind of thing. Right. Or, hey, Billy, why aren't you out of the house? Oh, wait, mom, I've got to go. My squad, on Call of Duty is waiting for me. I can't do that right now. So that seems to be the pattern. Is this whole like I've got to find this great, incredible, life fulfilling career first, and then I will somehow maybe move out. And it didn't used to be like that, right? It was, you get a job, whether it's something that
you like or not. Yeah.
You just do it because it's what you're meant to do.
How it's gotten that way.
I think, doing part, like I look at my dad and my dad started working when he was really young, doing what he could do at that time to help support the family because they just didn't make a lot of money. So, if he could go out at 15,
we've made it too easy on our children.
You know how it's always that you want to give your kids what you didn't have.
Yeah.
Growing up, I think there's a bit of that, and because of that, it's actually turned around and bitten them in the behind. So it's done like the opposite thing. Why leave the nest if the nest is comfy? There's no real push to leave the nest. If I've got everything I need, mom's still feeding me. It's safe here. And who knows, maybe too, when we look at a previous generation, there was what appeared to be a lot more turmoil. We go back from the Depression era, then you go right into World Wars 1 and 2. Shortly, after that, you start getting into Vietnam, Korea.
Yeah. And so those were all those generations when they were younger in their 20s, so to speak. They were going off to some war. They had to grow up real fast, right? You're not going to come back from that and move in with mom and dad.
Yeah.
No.
It
No.
was a whole different time. Yeah.
And plus, I mean, could you see a lot of the generation now? I mean, a lot of these guys couldn't fit their man buns in their helmet, right? Like, you can't have that. So, I mean, let's just face it.
Yeah.
It's just a different mindset.
Yeah, they had to grow up for sure. They were forced to grow up.
And you know what? I think that's the thing, right? Is they were forced to do that, but they also, I don't know. I think there was the idea of responsibility with family, and I need to contribute to this. And I think this is something that's kind of been lost, is that the family is everyone that's in that home shares the responsibility to make that home work, right? So when it's after dinner, if you look in a household and mom is the one who's, say, in the kitchen, putting everything away, doing all the dishes, cleaning up after dinner, and the kids are all playing video games, something's wrong there, right? It should be everyone is working to make that household, run efficiently. We did a parenting class at our church, and one thing that we were talking about was chores, and kind of asking the people in the class, did you do chores when you were young? And I was really surprised because there was a couple ladies there who, I don't know if their parents came here from Africa or if it was like maybe their grandparents, but they still had a very, their idea of family, was still very tight. And of course they're like nodding their head. Yes. Oh yeah. We had chores. And so I asked them, what were they? And there's, we were responsible for doing the, washing the clothes, naming, I said, okay, well, how old were you when you started? And they're like, we started when we were about 5. 5. Wow. Wow, man. I thought, I have my, start my kids around 11, 12 doing vacuuming and things like that. And I thought I was like, kind of on cutting edge.
The, I brought up that I live next to Amish before, right? The one child, I don't know how old he is. I don't know if he's 5. He might be a little older than that, but he's holding a battery operated, like DeWalt weed whacker, weed eater.
Yep.
Like, and that thing's bigger than him,
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
And he's, out there, it's like practically, he's just squatty down to the ground, and he's, like at a very young age, they're out there doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Right. I've never seen the man of the family, the father.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't garden or cut grass or do any of that stuff. That's, he's going out, he's doing carpentry, he's building stuff, he's, doing the big manly things, but tending to the rest of the place, it's all the children and the wife that do that stuff.
I'm done. Yeah, that's cool. Well, I think,
saying.
what would happen now is you'd have child protective services would be called if your son was out there at 5 years old,
a weed eater
with a weed,
chainsaw.
Like, can you imagine him out there, like, cutting the limbs and whatnot, and I think part of it too is just the responsibility of teaching the children respect for these instruments, that at that young age, right? Like, I think one thing that we see this is in the area of firearms. You look at typical kind of the South, where hunting, all this stuff is like a family traditions, and these children are brought up around that. They understand that a firearm is very dangerous. They are also taught to respect them. And I think that's very important, that they, instead of being shielded from these things and these, obviously, you have firearm responsibility. I'm not saying you just, like me, you leave guns laying around the house, but the children know, and they know what the purpose of these things are for. They know.
That's how I grew up.
Yeah,
I grew up in the same environment, family tradition of hunting, multiple generations.
Yeah.
So there were guns in the family. I mean, in the household since I was born.
Yeah.
And I was taught how to use them. I was, using BB guns when I was old enough, and I was taught all about it from my father, my grandfather. As soon as I was of age, I was going hunting, and there was a group of guys, right? Group of men that are passing on, all the elements of the outdoors and respect for the outdoors and just respect for firearms and safety aspects. Right? You got a 12-year-old carrying around a shotgun.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
yeah.
That's what I was doing, right? But now I think about it, gosh, I wouldn't trust some 20-year-olds with a shotgun.
Yeah.
Let alone 12-year-olds.
We had that discussion when it came to like alcohol, and again, for people listening, we celebrate our Christian liberties and our Reformed theology here, so we like to have a well-crafted beverage, and like Spurgeon, we like to smoke a cigar to the glory of the Lord, and I think we sort of saw this with some of my wife's family, who probably won't listen to the show, so I can maybe say this. But there was an idea of shielding at first of, okay, well, don't let the kids, see this or know that you have it, versus, oh no, here's this, drink, but it has to be consumed responsibly. There's a proper way to, use this. And I think that this can fall into all these categories of, power equipment to firearms to proper use, again, of alcohol, that way there isn't like this curiosity that's built up to the point of when dad's not looking, I'm going to go grab this.
Yeah, it's because
it's
the forbidden thing, right.
I mean, it goes back to the garden. Don't eat from this.
Fruit.
Yeah. Well, I want to go and eat from it. I want to see this.
Surely Dad didn't say.
Exactly. And again, I think too, this also goes into what really, I think in some ways drives me nuts, aspect of one of the many things on social media is you see people when they're out and they're always like holding their drink up, it's like, oh, hey, look at us. It's coming to associate fun with this thing, this item, this beverage, and that you can't have it without it.
That's how all the advertising is, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you see that, though, and you see this within even, particular circles of, some of the people, maybe even at church, I don't know. But this idea of, oh, hey, we're partying and here's our drink. And kids see that and it's, oh, wow. So this equals fun time. I want to have that fun time. And then I'm going to get it in some way when mom.
You mentioned the cigar thing too, but I mean, if you look at where advertising went with smoking, right now it doesn't really exist too much. I don't think.
There's no more.
But it was the same way. Advertising. I mean, I think we talked about maybe talking a bit more about how this affects us overall, maybe in some future episodes, where all kinds of various sins are being sold to us, and we're being tempted every day, all around us, through every sort of media type and whatnot. So yeah, it was to be manly. It was the macho man, right? The cowboy with his cigarette, Marlboro man type of thing. That's how they sold that stuff, and but they're doing it with alcohol, right? I mean, you watch any sports, on a weekend or whatever, any type of sports. The major sponsors of them are always alcohol companies, Budweiser and stuff like that. And all the commercials. You don't have some drunkard, stumbling around looking like an idiot, right? In the advertisement. No, of course not. but it's the cool guy with the beautiful girl, and and it's the beach, and it's so much fun. It looks like great. Like this is like the perfect scene, right? And he's drinking his whatever beverage. So you grow up associating with, if I'm going to be cool, I'm going to get the girl, I got to do this stuff.
Yeah, and then you combine that. So you see that, and then you combine it with some, going to get a little bit of touch some hot water here, but some particular denominations, shall we say, over-aggressive condemnation of, say, alcohol as one thing in particular, right? Well, that can just heighten the curiosity then of someone, right? Like, oh my goodness, these guys are so against this, and it's so dangerous, it's so evil. I want it. Instead of talking about it in a responsible manner, as far as, sure, my conviction is, alcohol is not forbidden, but like everything else, we must be responsible, not overindulge, and of course not let it control us. And that's with everything. I mean, I grew up in IFB. I was saved in an independent fundamentalist Baptist church, and through those years saw many very portly preachers that would condemn alcohol, but were like,
gluttons
downing. Still had the grease on their fingers from the sausages they had for breakfast or something. Right. So they want to condemn one thing. Well, let's talk about gluttony then in the same respect, or being just stewardship in general. Like, what you can say, condemn alcohol or smoking, but you're so full of preservatives and artificial sweeteners and all these other things that are cancer causing as well. Let's not.
Yeah, we're a bit inconsistent. I always thought there was this inconsistency around caffeine too, because caffeine is a pretty potent stimulant, right? I mean, we condemn nicotine, and I'm not here to say that we should have nicotine necessarily, but if you smoke one cigar every once in a while and you get the residual nicotine that you would get from not inhaling a cigar, which is, it's different, I think, than smoking 2 packs a day, right?
Sure.
They're just nicotine carriers. But we wouldn't think anything of the guy that drinks a pot of coffee every day or is, downing Monster Energy drinks all day long, right? And they're like high on caffeine all day, right? I mean, it's like, that's not good either. You're medicating yourself.
It's a stimulant.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
I mean,
it's a huge stimulant.
I can't do blah without having my coffee. Right. Yeah. Don't talk to me before I've had my coffee. Which I think I'll have my sip of my coffee.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with it, but it just, like everything we should be aware that there's this type of stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
Right. Even.
Well, I mean, that's it. Okay. So here's another little bit of controversy. Now that I've mentioned alcohol and tobacco, I might as well just go the full Monty.
And guns.
And guns.
My goodness.
Wow. Well, then, let me just throw this into it. The CBD oil I've been taking.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Wow. Man, now I'm throwing weed, marijuana into it, but I think that's
what is the topic for today? We're going.
Yeah, we're going into.
Well, our actual topic will be about the will of God, finding God's will as men. When we're talking about living our life as godly men, biblical men, how do we navigate that? But to get back to my CBD part, because I'm not getting off that bandwagon. Because I have very strong feelings about that. As far as the medicinal purposes, and I mean legitimate medicinal purposes. This is very different than rolling up a joint and smoking marijuana, as opposed to them being able to take a plant and extract something from it that has pain relieving properties. So someone like me who's struggled with chronic pain for years and years, who is able to take some of this oil, which is 1 mil, this little tiny bit, every day, and has had some decent relief from it, from an overall achiness in my joints. It does not affect my cognitive abilities. I don't, sit there and like zone out. I'm not seeing rainbows and, purple unicorns. It does not affect that in any way. It doesn't affect my, my reasoning. But my wife and I were talking about that last night when we were leaving your house, Gene, because we passed by a very large processing, growing area that's around
huge.
Huge. And of course you smell it. And the idea of, okay, is this something that is okay for a Christian? Right. And, I see it in a couple ways. First of all, if there is, like I've said, a legitimate medicinal purposes, that you're not taking it for, to alter your state of consciousness, which really comes down to any pain medicine, right? Sure. Any pain medicine you can take, and and I've had them. The oxys, you name it: OxyContin, oxycodone, hydrocodone, Percocets.
Yeah, they're all narcotics.
They're all narcotics.
The irony of it all, right? I mean, we think about, they're extracting CBD oil or whatever from a plant. Mm-hmm. Well, where do you think the other stuff comes from, too?
Well,
right? Opioids are from, you got heroin.
Yeah.
But you got legalized versions of heroin that they can prescribe to people.
Yeah. And I like the idea of something that being a little bit more natural, as far as something that's more synthetic and chemically based, that has so many more side effects, potential side effects. And then you think, what are the long-term, ramifications on your body for taking, if you're taking an oxy, if you're taking one of these things, you build up your tolerances to it. What else? What else are you damaging by taking these pills, right? As opposed to something that they just soak a plant in oil and then you take that. Like, that to me just seems like a more natural approach to something, as opposed to taking this artificial thing. So that's if I haven't alienated like everyone by now, that one probably just put it over the edge.
I think the key theme is like this stuff's all around. Yes, there are things that there are quote unquote legal or whatever, but also generally accepted.
Yeah,
we don't even think about, right? The coffee with all of its caffeine, the Monster Energy drink with all of its caffeine, whatever, completely legal. Don't even think about it. You could be drinking those all day.
Yeah,
at church, and no one would say a word to you. Or the fact is, you could take the prescription that you got from the doctor. Must all be good, right? And the reality is, it's legalized heroin practically, right?
Yeah,
that people are taking for pain and stuff like that. So you just got to watch and be just aware. I think that one, you're trying to be sold on all kinds of sin all around us all the time, and two, like let's be consistent, because everything we're ingesting in our food, in our drink, whatever, we have to be aware of what's in there and make sure that we're not doing things that for the wrong reasons, that we're not becoming addicted to things that weren't, because you could do it with legal things and things that would be universally accepted in the church. On a flip side, don't get too legalistic about any of this stuff either, because as long, if you're able to, use things properly, then it's probably okay.
And let alone when you get into the idea of a mood altering drug, such as when we start talking about Paxil and Xanax and Wellbutrin, and even nowadays those type of medicines it's like commonplace, and we've taken these medical diagnosis. Well, it's not even a medical diagnosis. We can talk about that later. And you wear them as a badge of honor, and then it's like, I have anxiety, and so I take Xanax or whatever, right?
We talked about it last time, right? We talked about children. We talked about boys being medicated more more often than girls, because they're just being men. They're just being masculine, right? And or exhibiting how God created us, right? To be full of energy, to be, out there taking dominion, whether it's taking dominion of the fort they build in the woods or whatever it is. This is how boys were made, right? And if they're distracted because they're looking out of the window because they'd rather be building the fort than doing math problems or whatever it is the teacher's trying to teach them, there's a tendency to say, they have attention deficit or whatever, and the first thing they want to do is medicate these kids. Right? So it's the same idea, and we'll accept that somehow for some reason.
And I want to make a quick note that this will probably be a 2-part episode today.
We haven't even got to the will of God
because we haven't gotten to that to our subject yet, and we're already 30 minutes in, and we're sure that people probably don't tune in to just hear us rant or talk about our day, but we will get to that, and it will probably go into a part 1, a part 2, because one thing we were talking about, we kind of started talking about pre-show when we were discussing like what's been happening in our lives, and I started to kind of go into a little bit of what's been going on with me, in particular, the past, I don't know, say month or so. And so we decided to say, hey, why don't we, instead of talking about this now, let's save it for the show, because it does kind of have to do with God's will. When we talk about being a biblical man, biblical masculinity, that's kind of what this first season of the Beards is about. We're looking at these particular areas that we face as men, right? Where we're going to have shows about where we talk about finances, stewardship, of things like our money and our time, these resources. We're going to discuss parenting. We're going to discuss marriage and relationships, and various things. And one of the key things is kind of like, as new believers, when you're a new Christian, and even later in life, when it's this, okay, what do I do? If you're younger, you're like, what do I do with my life? And this kind of topic is always, these little keywords, are thrown around. God's will, find God's will for your life. And it could be like, okay, well, how do I do that? Like, we always hear about this, but how does this actually like work out? And so this has kind of been working out a little bit with me. So I'll use this then as a transition into our time. I'm not going to get into too many specifics or even mention particular names, but let's just say for the past, I don't know, maybe 6 months in general, kind of been wrestling with a direction of kind of moving toward, and the possibilities of, I'll just say a church plant. So so this has kind of caused I just want to say, like, not, it's caused some discussion in the church that I'm at right now, kind of figuring this out, kind of how to kind of walk through these things, because I have a little bit different opinions on God's will and kind of how that works out and how he shows this. Right, then what could be considered the norm, and so the past, what was it, last week or so, I had a visit with a couple friends, but who are also elders of the church, kind of like talk about some of this stuff, talk about what's going on with me, and that was a good time of talking. But then I also that week had a sit down with another one of our elders who's, I would consider a dear friend as well, because he's someone who, kind of spent some mentoring relationship with me for a few years when I started attending this church, and we have a really good relationship. So we sat down and we're talking, because we had in, for people listening to this, part of the process of kind of with the church that I'm at now. They have like a releasing process for possible church planners, and so I had this initial meeting with the elder board, and that meeting kind of, I guess, didn't go the best, and due in part probably with some of my stubbornness to, I was trying to really kind of hold to some biblical verbiage that I see. And I did not necessarily share everything that could have influenced maybe how that meeting would have went. Let's put it that way. So I had this talk with this elder and kind of explained to him. It was our first time to kind of get to sit down after this meeting, and he wanted to, talk to me and just see how I was doing. And I explained to him that I kind of knew how that particular meeting was going to go because going into it, I was trying to use, like I've said, just particularly scriptural qualifications. All right. What does that look like? And I think, and this isn't anything against them or the church, but we've kind of, and this will tie into our subject of God's will, we've kind of brought in some extracurricular qualifications or expectations when someone is describing their desires to do something, right? We're looking for some experiences. We're looking for, we look at other people's experiences and start to use those as qualifications. And so I was kind of against that. I didn't want to do it from the beginning, like from that perspective. I wanted to use strictly biblical. So I explained that, and he said, that's, great. But then he said, so what have you been doing since then? All right. So since this meeting that was, like a month and a half ago, what have you been doing? And I said, well, not really a whole lot. I said, I've been kind of wrestling with some things. And I told him, I'm in Samuel right now, and I'm reading through Samuel, and I'm reading about Saul, and seeing that Saul had the kingdom taken from him because of his disobedience. He didn't wait for Samuel. He made the sacrifice, and the Lord was displeased. And so because of that, the Lord told Saul his kingdom would be taken. And I expressed that I was kind of feeling like Saul. And so I went kind of into my backstory and explained, and I'm pretty sure I had kind of had this discussion before, but for the sake of people listening and you guys who maybe don't know all this, I was saved when I was 15. I accepted the Lord, or he saved me when I was 15. Year and a half later, kind of, again, looking for direction, looking for what I should do. I was at the altar because this was a independent fundamental Baptist church. So, we had the altar calls and all that. So I'm up there one night and I'm really praying, and I have what feels at the time like this just pressure on me, like literally feeling like you're being pushed into the floor, just this heaviness. And I still feel kind of weird talking about it, but just kind of in my mind seeing me speaking or preaching, right? I'm thinking, okay, is this me? But all right, Lord, if you're telling me something, then I'll listen. And so, I shared it with a couple people at school. I went to a Christian school that was affiliated with this church, and I was not the best student. I was kind of a class clown, very sarcastic. I got in a lot of trouble with that. So I was a little reluctant to kind of share this part because I knew what the reaction was going to be. And so I didn't say it, but a schoolmate said at the beginning of class to our Bible teacher, hey, Mr. So-and-so, guess who feels called to preach? And he said, who? He says, Darren. And he kind of chuckled. And, that really kind of, if you're already kind of insecure about something, to have a teacher then kind of like, ha, 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 So time goes by at the school. I end up being released from the school because of differences I had with the principal. I go in the Air Force because it was something, I could do. I come back home and I start to attend my sister's church, which was a charismatic Baptist church. And that kind of sounds like an oxymoron. There's a long explanation in there that I'm not going to go into right now. But going from this IFB church to this, it was very freeing in a way because the worship was completely different. I wouldn't say it was full Pentecostal, but it was very charismatic. So during that time, and I'll get your guys' opinions too when this is done about this. Keep having a camera shut off, and I don't know why. So I shared my testimony, and then after the testimony, a lady comes up to me who kind of has a bit of a. She's known for receiving these like words of knowledge from the Lord, kind of like these insights. Again, I'm not going to get into whether or not this is legitimate or not, because a lot of people in the Reformed circles would reject this. And she basically was like saying that I need to get on doing what God had told me to do. So I'm trying to work this out, figuring out how I want to do this, because I had a really strong conviction that churches should bring up the next set of leaders, right? I know it's normal now. We kind of ship people off to colleges, to seminaries, to get trained. But even at this time, at this young age, I was like really feeling like I think this is a responsibility of the church. Because we see a lot of these things like this. We see, now I'm a biblical counselor, and we see churches that just kind of pass people off to quote unquote the professionals to get counsel, right? But I feel strongly that is actually a role of the church. So I was kind of sharing with my pastor and, these things, and, they were more of the mindset of, well, just go to seminary. And, we were at a men's retreat with our church there, and there was a man there who, he was an older gentleman. He was a farmer, not someone, not like a Benny Hinn looking person in a nice suit. The guy wore like Wilson sweats and like not even like the fancy ones. Like these were just gray, right? So he wasn't even like in Jordans or anything like that. So, but this guy, again, not to get into the subject of, spiritual gifts, as far as, manifestation, prophecy, those kind of things. I don't believe that capital P prophets exist today. But can people get insights from the Lord? All I know is that this guy, could look at certain guys and knew what was going on in their life. Like he would just call it out. And, my pastor described it like, it's like he's read your mail. So the evening's winding down, and I'm in the back. I'm talking to the pastor and the youth pastor about like what I should do. And he's like, why don't you go have this guy pray for you? He's like, having all this insight and stuff. So I walk up to him and I say, brother so-and-so, I said, do you have one more prayer in you? Because he was getting tired. And like I said, he wasn't in the best health. He was an older man. And he just grabs me, bear hugs me. And he's praying, and then he's done. And he steps back, and he touches my mouth. And he says, you're thinking about preaching. I was like, yeah, I am. And he says, we'll do it. So I'm like, all right, I'm feeling some confirmation here. Well, then like our church kind of went through some turmoil, ended up like dividing. That this is where I met Nancy. And of course, get into a relationship and then all your plans go off the rails, and not to blame her, but so we end up leaving, we end up getting married, and kind of, the thing where you just want to get the job and, have something stable to support your wife and all this. And so I didn't end up going to college. Time goes by. And so this kind of up and down begins to happen in my life of, all right, I'm not finding contentment in these other things. I need to go after here. But then I would come back to thinking like, wow, I messed up though. Right. Cause now I'm almost 30, and if I go to college and then seminary, I'm going to be in my 40s by the time I'm done. And, it's too late and time's passed me by. So, I end up looking for fulfillment and things in other areas of life, that, just never would do that. So, and I shared in I think in our first episode where this almost led to our divorce, because of these things. I just kind of, out of, desperation, searching and trying to fill voids, had just created this whole separate life for myself. So, all that happened, restoration happened. Nancy and I, we kind of recommit, and we're doing things the right way. And so this comes back down to, again, these feelings of wanting to pursue this. And so this is kind of like what led up to our conversation where I'm getting to with Saul is, did I mess this up? Okay. Because I did not obey back when I had the opportunity, and it was clear, had I now messed this up now, and now I'm kind of pursuing something out of my flesh, and I didn't want to do that. So this talk now with this elder, Steve, let's start using his name, was very good. It was very, took a big weight, because he said a couple things that I hadn't thought of before. And the first thing was, he said, well, you're not Saul. He said, you're not Saul. First of all, he said, God never wanted Saul to begin with. The people wanted Saul, and they're the ones who chose Saul. God didn't choose him. And that his kingdom was taken away. Well, he wasn't supposed to have that kingdom to begin with. And then he brought up, he's like, yeah, there is a part of disobedience here, and there's a penalty. And he says the penalty is the fact that, you could have been much farther along had you started and listened and obeyed in your 20s. He said, but that doesn't mean that God still isn't necessarily calling you to do that now, and that it's now somehow too late to start. So that was a really good meeting, and it really kind of helped settle things for me personally, and has actually kind of given me the confidence to move forward in that. So, so that being said, when people hear this, we are looking to plant a church. We're kind of praying through that, looking at a particular area, whether that will be here in our home state, Delaware, or right over the line, closer to Gene's homestead over in Maryland. But we've kind of been able to move forward with some of that planning, that particular planning of that. And this kind of gets into now, we've talked about it, we've pretty much decided on the name of Providence Church, because, again, we're good Reformed people here. We believe in God's providence, and God's providence being his sovereign will enacted. This is how God works things. And he's worked things this past year by putting people in paths and things like this that have kind of really brought all this together. So seeing God's providence, and being obedient to God's providence, we're now going to really be moving forward with that. So, our website is going to be myprovidencechurch.com. You can check that out. We've got information on there. So, and as this podcast progresses, we'll have more information about that. But all that long story right there that took up another 20 minutes of our time, being said of God's will. All right. How do we find that? How does someone out there listening? Because, look, there's probably not a bigger thing that people wrestle with as a young Christian or any stage of their life than God's will. And I think this is, I don't know if this is maybe something to just keep selling books or what, because I think there's, been several people that have really laid it out the best. John MacArthur being one of them, who did a sermon on one, and Gene has those points written down of that is clearly in Scripture. But I feel like we have let a lot of people's experience come into play and almost become Scripture-like of these qualifications of God's will, how we look for it. And one recent message I listened to by Vodi Bakum, that I think this was something he did a while ago, though. Really, we have ways of looking for God's will that is really mysticism, not Christianity. It's not biblical. It's mysticism, where we're looking for these signs and confirmations and things like that. So we were going to talk about that. Like I said, we're going on about 50 minutes. So whether or not we want to start it fresh in the next episode.
Well, I just want to add something. I think maybe we can decide that, I think. Yeah. But, I mean, you went through your description or your story there. Mm-hmm. And maybe to some that would be listening to this, that sounds like mysticism, or that kind of points in that direction, or feels like it's another story of God's will being to be a preacher. And I'm here from the perspective of, because I've wrestled with this too, feeling like I've heard way too many times, and I can feel like I'm constantly hearing or sensing that if I'm not a missionary or I'm not a preacher, that I am somehow wasting my life, or I'm somehow not a good Christian. And I think the vast majority of people listening to this are not put in their place. They're not in a place where God intends them to be preachers or missionaries. And so we are, God's sovereign over everything. And you might be given the talent and be put in a place where you're supposed to be in local government. You're supposed to be a carpenter. You're supposed to run, a local general store. Whatever it might be, you should be, pursuing God's will is not, I need, to pray really hard, and I need, God's going to, give me signs of where I need to go, and it's all going to be very spiritual. So the stuff that, you mentioned it already, right? John MacArthur just kind of really lays it out pretty simply. And when I listened to that the first time, and he's just rattling off scripture after scripture after scripture, that's God's will in your life is this. God's will is this. God's will is this. I'm like, gosh, could it be any more explicit? Like, it's all throughout the Bible what God's will is. And so, the written word is his revelation to us. We don't, he uses this funny story. It's like the guy that's walking down the street slips on a banana peel, lands on a newspaper that has some island in the Caribbean, and they're like, oh, I think that's God telling me that I'm supposed to be a missionary there on that island in the Caribbean. It's like, really, that's you're looking in the wrong place. That's not the way that it happens.
Well, I feel like that is kind of what we expect. So why don't we get into those specifics in the next episode then, and look at MacArthur's thing. That way we have a little bit of cliffhanger here, and people have a little skin. It's like they've come this far.
Bait the hook.
They'll probably just look it up. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, don't tell them that. But that would be good though, because maybe then, because I'll put the links to MacArthur's message and to Vodi's message will be in the description. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to click on those and then kind of go right to those those on there. If you're listening to us, it'll be in the show notes, or just search out John MacArthur on God's Will, and same thing, Vodi Bakum on discerning or finding God's will. Those are two excellent messages. I think that they specifically talk about a biblical basis for it, and so we'll talk about that. We'll dive into that more in the next episode, and then I also have a what I call my three spheres. I think I got this from someone else, but I can't remember who. So now I just call it mine. It's my three spheres for determining God's will, because I think this can be not just big things, right? But a lot of people will get stuck on, should I buy a house? Should I buy this car? Should I date this person? And they're all waiting for, throwing out a fleece to determine that, and it doesn't have to be that difficult. So next episode, what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the specifics and how to find God's will. So be sure you tune in for that. Again, we're going to have a lot of information and resources available, so you can find those in the show notes. We also do have things, again, on sovereignjoy.org that tie into these things, that will kind of help you make these decisions. So be sure to check that out. So sorry if this was just more of a discussion time on this podcast, but we'll have a lot more of the meat and potatoes next time. But we want to thank you guys for tuning in here. And, we hope to see you guys next time.